Hello again, everyone. This is the Alok Emet channel, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, and this is March 23rd, 2021. Another lesson here titled God in Eden. And this is the Alok Study Notes Torah commentary. This lesson is not from God. So God in Eden. I'm looking at the idea here today that the God in Eden seems to be different from the God in the rest of the Torah, the God of the children of Israel. Now we know, like in Genesis chapter 2, about verse 17, this first God that made the garden and placed a man in it, and so on, had said, don't eat from this particular tree of the knowledge of good and evil, eat from all these other trees and so on, but if you eat from this particular tree, you're going to die. Then we know that they went ahead and they did eat from that tree and they died. So Genesis chapter 3 verse 11, after it's found out now that they ate, and this God, the first God of Eden, is angry, it says, and he said, who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee, that thou shouldest not eat? Now, as the chapter goes on, we go down to verse 24. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the garden of Eden cherubims, and a flaming sword, which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. This nation, or these people in Eden, were punished. They were driven out and given hardship in life, and the punishment never ended until we're living in that right now. So it was never corrected. It was never brought to an end. But later on, a new agreement was made up between God and the people in the Bible known as Israel. So this God abandoned Israel. So this God abandoned whatever was going on in Eden after he sent the people out of their Edenic home in punishment. If you think of it in terms of the punishment of the Israelites, in the Israelites' punishment, oftentimes the word captivity comes up. So captivity, punishment, similar thing. God is hurting the people because of something that they did with, by way of bad living. They weren't living in a righteous manner and keeping his Torah, living by their agreement with him. So the Israelites are cast out oftentimes in other people's lands, and that's their captivity that they serve, and then they get to be restored back to their homeland. The people of Adam, or Adam and Eve, the Edenic people, they were sent into captivity as well. Their captivity was in the lands that are outside of the Garden of Eden, but it was never reversed. We know, like in the book of Judges, many times when the Israelites were captive to other Mesopotamian kings, their captivity came to an end. They were restored and they were serving the Lord properly and enjoying his blessings and so on, until they sinned again, and another captivity would come. And it just repeated like that a number of times. And then later on, Israel went into Assyrian and Babylonian captivity. That did not come to an end in the pages of the Torah, but was prophesied many times to come to an end later on, which we're saying is going to happen in modern times here that we're living. so far into the future from Bible times, but it is clearly said to be coming to an end. It has an end. The captivity of Adam and Eve will not come to an end with many prophecies in the Torah. It just does not end. In fact, I find it a bit strange looking at it this evening and I could have taken more time to develop this lesson a little bit more, but I think you'll still understand where I'm coming from, is that there is a problem where the God in Eden seems to be different from the God in the rest of the Torah, because he operates different in terms of punishment for sin. The God in Eden is different because he punished the people of Eden forever. It just never comes to an end. And I'm aware that some people say Adam and Eve, those are the Israelites. Some say Adam was the Israelite and the woman somebody else or whatever, or some just say they were all as Israelites. So I'm aware that that's out there. But I want to show you something else that came to me this evening. Even if we're to say that they are that they are Israel in the garden, it's a story about Israel, and the Bible speaks of the vineyard of the Lord and so on. So you say, yeah, see, that's the Garden of Eden. But look now, when the God of the prophets and of the later Israelite kingdom spoke of the punishment for his people, he talked about it many times through his prophets and made many promises of the return from captivity, and was very, very clear and strong that this particular captivity of the named Israelite kingdom, Israelite people, would come to an end. Their captivity would have an end. So, as a part of the profile of the later God in the Bible, or the God of the people of Israel, as a part of his profile, he talks very clearly, with no guessing game going on, that it is specifically a people called Israel, his people, who are being punished, and that this same people of Israel will be redeemed. He talks clearly about why they are being punished, spells out their sins through his prophets and his many attempts to reach them before it got that far, and then made many talks about them coming out of their specific captivity for those sins that he named through the prophets. So there's no way anyone can wonder why they're going into captivity as they read through the book, and who their God is, and who the people of that God, who they really are. There's no way anyone can wonder about those questions as if it's hard to figure out. But in Eden, it is not quite clear about this whole Adam and Eve situation. It's like there are different people, and while sometimes it seems somebody mentions something that one will say, this is Israel in the Garden of Eden, the God of the Israelites, he does not talk with any kind of detail about Eden. He does not make it clear that this is Eden. One has to read that in the text. If you see the word vineyard, you say, oh, that's Garden of Eden. And all well and good, it seems, sometimes. But you see, the profile now is different, because the God of the Torah, which is the later part of the Torah, which is most of the Torah, post-Eden, he does not care about Eden the way he cares about Israel. He does not care about the kingdom of Eden the way he cares about the kingdom of Israel. He does not talk with many words about the kingdom of Eden, and hardly ever mentions it, probably never, although I think a prophet or two had said something about Adam, but nothing real proper. But the New Testament, they seem to like Adam, and that's suspect because, the New Testament is just doing its own thing over there. But why is it that the New Testament people are so eager to talk about Adam and the garden and so on? But all the strong prophets, when the kingdom was up and running of Israel, did not care to dive into Edenic life and Edenic transgressions. They just didn't care. So we're dealing with a God that has different things on his mind and does not care. So you see the difference now that the God in Eden is different, because when Israel was sinning now, that God that Israel had, he cared about the nation, the kingdom of Israel, so much that he kept talking about it. Like he said, I kept getting up every morning, sending my prophets all the time in the morning to talk to you and so on. He did that a lot. He does not let up on it. He's always going after Israel where their transgression is concerned, so that they can clear it up before judgment really comes down upon their heads. So he never gives us a break. It's like this is his thing to do. Israel is his nation, and it makes it seem like whoever the God in Eden is, that's a different nation that you're dealing with. Now, can you see what I mean? So you might say, oh, vineyard, I planted a vineyard. And then you say, see, that's because that's Garden of Eden. That was about the Israelite. But the God in Eden does not go on and on about Eden's transgressions. And the God of Israel later in the book does not go on and on about Eden's transgressions either. That got them kicked out of Eden. You see? So if the God of the prophets and of Israel can't shut up about Israel, what about the biggest sin that was in Eden that brought all of this problem anyway, and that brought even the people into the earth who would later become Israel? So the source of people on earth is Edenic people, is Adam, is Eve. But he doesn't care. But he keeps going back to the supposed source of the Israelites, so that the prophets and other people are talking all the time about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Nobody really cares about Adam and Eve. That is very, very suspect. Something is going on that is not right about the Edenic story. Something is not right. And again, this is the Yalak Study Notes Torah commentary, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon. So as I'm presenting this in the Torah commentary, you just need to think this through for yourself. What could be the reason for that? It seems like there are two different gods, because he does not care about Eden and what went on like he cared about Israel and what went on. So now if you look, this God of the Torah, which looks like a different new God, which would then mean he was not the God of earth or the God of Eden when before the so-called fall and eating from the tree, there was peace on earth and long life and righteousness, and people had, like some people put it, superhuman powers or whatever, because they could live long and whatever. They were just righteous and sinless and so on. So the God of the Torah is like a lesser God, because he runs a world where he's running people who are sinful even though they are supposed to be the righteous on earth. So the God of the Torah is like a lesser God, because he runs a world where he's running people who are sinful even though they are supposed to be the righteous on earth. They're sinful all the time. At least the Edenic people, they only got to sin one time before judgment came on them. The God of the Torah, or the God of Israel, he never, as part of his profile now, he never enforced punishment forever. Every time they sinned and went into captivity, he would bring them back, restore them, bring them back, forgive them, restore them, bring them back, and so on. And even with the last two captivities, Assyrian and Babylonian captivity, massive amounts of prophecies from multiple prophets that this is going to come to an end. The God in Eden does not give any word that you're coming out of this. Once I drive you, once you get out of these gates here, you're not coming back. In fact, I'm going to put cherubims there, it said, with flaming sword. You're not getting back into this. He doesn't even offer them any hope of returning. So what we are seeing here, the difference between these two gods is that one is deeply concerned about bringing the people back, and it's like giving him a heartache that he even has to send them into punishment. The first one in Eden, that God, he just like quickly gets angry, kicks them out, pronounces judgment, kicks them out, and he doesn't even give any care what they're going to face out there. And if they can even make it back, it's like it's not even a discussion. He doesn't care. You're just not coming back here. This looks like two God. When you're reading spiritual material, this would be two profiles for two different gods. So the God of the prophets then, the God of Israel, he never enforced punishment forever. He's always interested in making sure that people return and that there is a restoration. And he talks about it all the time through his prophets. He always rescued the people who he was working with. The God in Eden, working with Adam there, and then Eve came on quickly after, I guess. And he does not care about rescuing them. He drives them out and he doesn't care. Into what I might say now, if I push it, he drove them out into take this lightly now, but he drove them out into a godless world. Because while the story is very short, we never saw God operating in the outside world, outside of Eden, I mean. Once he created it, he only showed up in the garden. So he drove them out into a godless world and does not care if they return to anything that has to do with the operation of God, other than just air out there to breathe and trees growing out there and so on. He sends them into a godless world. The God of the prophets, the God of the later part of the book, which really is most part of the book, he cares about a God-induced people, a God-filled people. That's what he cares about. These are two different gods that are presented in the book. How can God be so different like that? To always want to talk about the restoration of Israel, but never cares about the restoration of Adam and Eve or the restoration of Eden. Yes, I know it says, and when he's delivering Israel and so on, Book of Joel and elsewhere, I think it will be as the Garden of Eden. But you see, that's just a light touch. Be as it, be like it. But if you read some more now and consider, he's likening it to that. But he's restoring Israel to the actual Israel, because he said you're going to rebuild, right? You're going to build the old waste places. But he only says it will be like Eden. But he never promises that Adam and Eve, their restoration. He kicks out in judgment Adam and Eve, and he kicks out Israel out of their land. Then he says to Israel, you will specifically be redeemed and returned to your land and rebuild and set it up again as it was in former times. But he does not specifically offer that to Adam and Eve and say specifically, you will return and you will be redeemed and you will go back to Eden and rebuild and regrow the trees there and so on. He doesn't. These are two different gods operating in the text. Nothing I read from other people, although I'm aware that some people say there's a God in Genesis 1 and a God in Genesis 2. That's not what I'm basing this off. I'm just basing it off the way punishment was handed out and a promise of restoration was or was not handed out or promised. So that shows two different gods right here. So the God of the Torah, the later part of the Torah, he never enforces punishment forever on those, when I said that earlier, on those who he's working with, on the righteous. Now for the wicked, Yeah, because if he's just going to cut them off, they'll perish forever. That's different. But those, the righteous, the chosen ones, are the one he's working with. He never enforces punishment forever to the whole group, the whole nation. Like you might be like one person who will say his house or that man will be cut off from Israel. I mean, I'm talking about the whole nation will not be cut off forever. So it's like a different God. So now, this God is consistent in the later part of the Torah that was speaking to the prophets. He's consistent. He never changes his way of dealing with the people of Israel. The kingdom of Israel is dealt with in the same way when it comes to their punishment and restoration. You're always going to be restored like that time. Go 70 years, ride that out in Babylon, then I will come back and take you. Blah. He's always promising a restoration after. So you're going to get the punishment for your transgressions, then you're going to come back. It's going to be sure. He's always like that. Why would this same God, if it is the same God, slip from that kind of stuff in Genesis and not care? You mean when he's restoring Israel, he don't remember that Adam and Eve is left out there wandering? Because that now makes me feel like Adam and Eve, they are the wanderers like Cain. They're just wandering, they're just out there, they're just gone. But they, more than Israel, would have had more of the secrets of God, because Adam walked and talked with God personally in ways that the later people of Israel did not. They were the first to see. Now you get some accident and the police want to know who actually saw, who was a witness, who saw this stuff, or who was here first and so on. You're telling me, you would think that in our world now, they say people have been on earth for 100,000 years, some say 1,000,000 years, some say whatever. So the first peoples on earth, they would have the more clear understanding or picture of what earth was like, what the sun looked like in the sky at the time when they first witnessed the sun and the moon and so on, what the animals were like, were they super friendly and so on, or were they vicious like they are now, whatever, how tall the trees grow, were trees more vibrant in their colors and so on, what was the human body like in terms of its power and its health and so on. They were the first ones, so they would have seen it. So Adam in the garden talking with God, that man should have an authority on communication with God and prayer and so on than any Israelite person would have later, or prophet would have later knowledge of, or even New Testament people filled with the Spirit from the day of Pentecost coming upon them. Adam would have first-hand account of what it is like to talk to God, and he would have the most pure communication with God that beats any Israelite prophet. Why? Even Moses and Elijah and so on. He would beat the great Moses at communication with God, the knowledge of it. Why? Because they later, these prophets, came in a world that was already filled with sin and filtered. The presence of God was filtered out, right? So they are cradled in a world of sinfulness, evil, wickedness, and so on. That's going to dull out what you can see and receive from God, even if God were to appear. But the one who is fully in the presence of God in a world where there is no sin yet, Adam, he would have seen and known and received the more fuller experience with communicating with God. You say the prophets got a lot when they met with God. Yeah, Moses had the fire experience there upon the mountain and so on. But he's still dealing with doubt in his mind and so on. So that's no complete experience with God, because his experience, while powerful, put your hand in and take it out of your bosom, drop that stick and pick it up like snake, it is still filtered by something that is going on in him that does not allow him, does not release him to be as free with God as the first man, Adam, who was free before sin hit the world, because Moses was still in the presence of God talking about, oh, but I'm afraid, like how can I go back and so on to Egypt. But Adam had no restrictions because they did not sin yet, they did not follow. Adam had no restriction. So that's an unhindered, unfettered relationship with God, and just like there's nothing between him and the Most High there, or the Creator, the God in Eden. So he's getting a pure, direct, live, like pure electricity coming through the wire, so to speak, when God is walking and talking with him in Eden. You're telling me that's not a more powerful testimony of what God was like and world was like and earth was like and existence. This man experienced existence in a pure kind of way before any sin hit earth. And you're telling me Moses has a stronger word than this man Adam in Eden? No, can't be. Moses and all the other prophets, as powerful as they seem to be in the pages of the scriptures, took second place. All their experiences took second place to what Adam saw. That's your Lock Study Notes Torah commentary. Think of it. Would you like to meet God now with all the sin in the world and all the sin in your life that you have done, thought, and the memory and so on? All the guilt you're going to feel that's going to make you whatever. Adam didn't have no hiding of face before sin. It's after sin they're trying to run and hide. But before that, Adam was just free. He was like God in his freeness to come around God and be in the presence of God the same way. There's nothing holding Adam back. So now, let me run through a verse here. Malachi chapter 3 and verse 6 and 7. For I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. I am the Lord. So again, he's saying, you're not consumed. Why? That's a promise of restoration. You are not consumed. But he's saying, I don't change. So because I don't change or I am consistent, I'm always going to try to restore you and so on, so you are not consumed. So that not consuming and not destroying them completely, but restoring them, that is a part of the God that does not change. Well, is it a change from the God who left Adam and Eve to be consumed out in a world that they've never been before and never talked to them again, never communicated, and leave them there with no promise of restoration? If God never changes, he would have dealt with Israel the same way and then chose another nation who Moses is like, look, you can't go make no other nation because, you might as well just get rid of me as well because blah, blah, blah. And the rest of it goes on. But this is clearly two different gods here because God does not change. So he always promises to let the people not be consumed or not be destroyed forever. But he destroyed Adam and Eve forever and destroyed their place, right? He destroyed them forever to make sure that they know that they are being destroyed forever. When you leave, you will not return. He put the flaming sword. He put weapons of war. And he puts angels that the text never showed us that they had to deal with before. And he blocked them out. They are consumed. They are destroyed. The sword of fire is letting them know this is forever death. But this one now in Malachi says, you are not consumed. This is a different God that we're dealing with than the God in Eden. Verse 7, even from the days of your fathers ye are gone away from mine ordinances, and have not kept them. Return unto me, and I will return unto you, and so on. So you see, he's pushing after them. He's always wanting them. It's like, even from the days of your father, from the days. So no matter how long it took, it's like going way back to the days of your fathers. But again, a different God, because it's going way back to the days of your fathers to talk about the transgressions. Why does he stop short instead of going and not go back all the way to the days of Adam and Eve? He's going back to the days of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You hear that all the time. He refuses to go back to the days of Adam and Eve when there was perfection on earth. He only goes back to the days of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to deal with their sins when Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was already living in a world of sin. If this was the God of Eden, wouldn't he want to bring them their memory back to a time when there was purity on earth and tell them, aim for that? Instead, he tells them, aim for a sinful condition on earth that brought in three sinful people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who had to fight through a life of sin themselves, but trusted in me. You see, this is not the same God as the first God in the Bible, the God in Eden. These are two different gods. The second God took over in this Abraham relation. The second God took over with the people of Israel. The second God took over, and he cannot go back to the Adam and Eve people because they are not his people. So he doesn't own them. He's not promising them restoration. They are not his people. He doesn't claim them. He doesn't own them. It's a different God that owns them and claims them. And that God operated differently. He said, get out forever. You will die if you eat from that. And he killed them all. But the second God now in the book, he says, if you die, I will restore you. I will resurrect you. Ezekiel 37-39, he talks about, can these dry bones live? He's going to restore them again. The second God in the book, the God of the prophets, the God of Israel and so on, that God restores. He gives life. He gives a second chance. He gives life again. The first God, he don't give no life except once. After that, you are dead. You're done for. These are two different gods. Jeremiah 31 and verse 31. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. The days are coming, so he's making a promise again now, because I change not, Malachi 3:6. So he's making the promise to make sure they are not consumed. I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel. Why doesn't he go back to the first house, the house of Adam and Eve, or the house of Adam? He don't go back to that because it was not his house. This is my view, at least, on the Alak's Torah, Study Notes Torah commentary. It is not his house, so he can't go back there. He's only going back to the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob house, the Israel house. And he says, I'll make a new covenant. But at no point in all these promises to restore Israel in the end times does he talk specifically and clear and plainly about restoring any covenant with Adam and Eve. Why is that? They're probably just not his people. Something is strange and fishy about the Adam and Eve story. It disconnects from the rest of the Torah, which is most of the Torah, because this is the first part with the first God in Eden is just a very, very small part of the whole Torah itself. But it is a disconnect there. That God and that people, the Adam people, cannot connect properly with. And when you look at the genealogies, they don't even like dealing with Adam. The prophets, when do you hear the prophets giving like even a full chapter talking about Adam and Eve, our fathers and so on, when the same Torah says, honor in the commandments, honor your father and your mother. They don't, the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Obadiah, and all the Moses, they do not honor the Israelites themselves. They do not honor Adam and Eve, the original parents on earth, the mother and father on earth. They don't honor them. So they're breaking the commandment right there. They're breaking the Torah by not honoring Adam and Eve. So that your days will be long in the land. No wonder they got kicked out of the land so many times and killed off so many times by the enemy nations, because they weren't honoring Adam and Eve. So something is wrong with the story. Honor your mother and your father. But they honor new parents now, new fathers, and this whole Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is on the go back to Abraham. But they don't honor the original, right? And it's like Isaiah said in some place, he said, Israel is worshipping new gods, newly come up, that your fathers did not know. And here it is, they are honoring new parents, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that the Torah did not know from the start, because the Torah at the start knew Adam and Eve. And Adam called his wife's name Eve because she is the mother of all living. But the Israelite, man in the street, the peasant, all the way up to the prophet, priest, and king, refused to keep the Torah commandment that says honor your father and your mother. They refused to honor the original parents. How could an Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have come into existence, and Moses, if there was not an Adam and an Eve? They refused to honor them. The Israelites did this. And it's funny that the new God in the book never ever corrected Israel for not honoring their mother and their father that got kicked out of Eden. They never honored them, and the God of the prophets, the second God in the book, never chastised them for that. And it's funny that the first God just got eclipsed out because he never gets a chance to speak to say, hey, he doesn't call them back to himself. Hey, I was here from the start, I did this. He never gets to speak. He was just cut out of the book. And his people, the Adam people, they were cut out of the book as well. So their fathers, the fathers of the Israelites, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Israelites, they knew those fathers and the covenant made with their fathers, but they did not know the covenant made with the Edenic people. They did not know the Edenic covenant. The only covenant mattered to them is just whatever come with Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. They don't know the original covenant on earth when no one had any religion. But people were free and they did something and got kicked out. They were more free at that time, before the Abraham supposed freedom. Is it freedom when you're being assaulted by your God all the time, repeatedly? I don't know. At least Adam and Eve only got assaulted one time. Okay, one more here and then close it out now. Amos, I talked about this long time ago, but let's look Amos chapter 3, verse 1 and 2. Hear this word that the Lord has spoken against you, O children of Israel. And jump to verse 2. You only have I known of all the families of the earth. Therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities. You only have I known of all the families of the earth. I told you already, the first family on earth was the family of Adam. How come this second God can say that? Because he never knew the Adam people. That was the people of another God. The second God in the book, which is the God of the prophets and the God of the scribes and the God of the Israelites, he has a different family, the family of the children of Israel. So he never knew the people of the other God, the first people. Because if you're saying he's the same God of all of the book, how could he say that when Adam and Eve would have then been his people because he created them? The first family on earth then would have been the family of Adam. So Israel would then be his second family that he made up. But he says, instead of knowing two families, he says, you only have I known of all the families of the earth. So he never knew Adam, the Adam family. That is a problem. That is a problem. Just look at the book. Come to the book like with a childlike mind. If you were in Eden and everything was pure on earth and so on at that time at first, you would have the mind of a child. You would have honesty and clarity and so on. The problem is today, we don't have that honesty when we approach God and that clarity and so on, because everyone's deceived and everyone has been deceived and everyone is deceiving themselves. Even the wicked who doing the wicked stuff in the earth, even they are deceived and deceive themselves, because they deceive themselves thinking that if we just continue to do this, we will win. Everyone on earth has been deceived. So the God in Eden, to me, clearly seems different. He does not end his punishment of Adam and Eve. He never will call them back. He never prophesies of calling them back. And he blocked the place and burned it down, it seems, or something close to that with a sword and fire. But the second God in the book, he cares about the punishment, cares about the people. He always tries to bring them back. These are fundamentally two different gods in their approach to dealing with people and with transgression and restoration. Yalak Study Notes, Torah Commentary, Yalak Emma Channel, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon. Thank you again for listening.